Did I? Great. And so, hi. This is super exciting. So we're doing Instagram Live. I'm super excited to be here, and it's an absolute pleasure and an honor to be here with Dr. Sarah Thornton. And she's just an icon, right? So she is a sociologist. She has written so many wonderful books. We're going to be talking today about a wonderful book, Tits Up, that I had the joy and pleasure of reading right here, and everyone should as well, and really delves into breast, what we know and what we don't know, and a lot of our misconceptions. So, and how that applies certainly to transgender patients, non-binary and gender diverse patients. So super excited to delve into that. But before we start our discussion, I do want to let the audience and folks who are participating and others have been on Instagram Live with me know as well. We have the comments function off, but if you do have any questions, I do encourage you to submit questions. Do so through the questions function, and I will be keeping an eye on that, and then we can intersperse that through our conversation with Dr. Sarah Thornton. And with that, so once again, love the book. I appreciate, I think, your openness, your honesty, and I think for me, as someone who is a plastic surgeon, a lot of us as plastic surgeons have egos and feel like we know everything, right? But I think you've really opened my eyes to so many aspects within the surgical world and just kind of the social world of breasts, and it's truly fascinating. And so, what I wanted to do, or a burning question that I have, and it's something that I guess I've gotten so used to in posting photos, but I just have to ask this question because it's just been bothering me, and I know patients have brought this up as well. Is the censorship of nipples? Why?
Yes.
What have they done? What have nipples done to deserve this? But I read the section of your book that talked about this. I guess there was a history of even male nipples being censored. It's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that, like prior to the 1930s. But like Sarah, if you could just talk just briefly just about like the censorship of nipples and where this came from and where we're going.
It is crazy, and it is a mark of our inequality that feminine nipples are considered obscene, and male nipples, masculine nipples, are considered aren't even noticed half the time. I mean, especially when it comes to like a silk shirt. You know, if a woman's nipples are shown through some kind of thin t-shirt, there can be commentary, and we don't even notice men's nipples. And of course, when it comes to top freeness or toplessness, you know, who's the most famous topless man in the world? Jesus Christ, followed perhaps by Buddha, or maybe Buddha comes first and then it's Jesus. But, that's a chest, a naked chest with nipples, which is, and the nakedness and the nipples are a mark of his humanity, his authenticity, his honesty, and that's a sacred chest. And then, oh my God, no, those if the nipple's on a boob, it's profane, and we got to keep it out of sight. And it must be very frustrating for you, because you can't actually share your work, at least your work on the top half of people's bodies, on the internet very easily, or on social media very easily. I had the great frustration of being kind of shadow banned on social media, not because I was revealing bare breasts, but I was using the word tits. And I that is also a kind of, it has become a political issue. Women tend to use only two words to describe
Mm.
their mammary glands, either breasts or boobs if they're white, and then perhaps breasts and titties if they're Black Americans. And whereas straight men anyway have like about 700 different words that they might choose, and with some glee and joy, to refer to women's hooters and racks and knockers and melons and all the rest of it, and so who is defining these things? Who thinks they own them? you know
Yeah,
and
that
so
is
I decided that tits is a man's word, that I felt like I wanted to reclaim and help redefine with the book.
no. And I absolutely love that. And then just going back to that whole idea of being able to, portray images online that are going to be helpful for patients. Because it is for us, because we certainly do a good number of top surgery procedures, so mastectomies, and then also breast augmentations. And so and then anything that's in between. So we can have a patient, right? So a trans feminine patient, or actually a transmasculine patient. Let's start with the transmasculine patient. So for their before photo, if they have breasts, we have to censor their areolas, and then afterwards, magically, once they've had their mastectomy, then their nipples are okay and acceptable for all to see. And that has been such a very frustrating thing to see, because clearly patients want to see the differences between the areolas and how they're going to be resized and what you're starting off with. But you can't, because it somehow is just vulgar or X-rated. And the other thing is also when we have patients who want more patient, like tailored, procedures, right? So we want to leave behind, I have patients who want to leave behind some breast tissue, right? So then where does it transition from being a quote unquote masculine versus a feminine chest? Because clearly if it's masculine, the nipples are allowed to be seen, but heaven forbid it's feminine, then we have to cover the nipples. So if you have someone who's in between, how does Facebook or Instagram or anyone determine at what point those nipples have to be censored? Usually we get like a message saying, hey, this is an indecent photo, right? So some person has deemed this picture feminine, therefore it's indecent. So hide those nipples. So I find that bizarrely just bizarre that is even the
It
case.
is, it is, it's bizarre, but it's also sexist and misogynist too, you know? And it can be, I mean, one rather great thing about the ambiguity is there was a trans woman who managed to change the law in Chicago, or change the bylaws in the city of Chicago, because they had this, thing on the books. You had to wear pasties. You
Mhm.
weren't allowed to be fully topless. But then, she was a performance artist, and I think also did some perhaps burlesque on the side, and managed to change the law because she so befuddled the jury and the judge about her gender, which is
Mm.
kind of irritating on the one hand, because like we know she's a woman, she's a trans woman, but because they're still trapped in all sorts of different notions, she was able to change the law in the
That's such,
city. And so that,
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I'm like all for the equality of the test, and I'm grateful to her for being involved with that court case, which I'm sure was, you know, who wants to go to court for anything? It
No,
is not a pleasant business, but she really took one for the team, and that's in general my feeling about I'm so grateful. I'm, a cisgendered queer person, not kind of boring. And my wife actually, we used to joke we're too straight to be queer, but like, just like boring U-Haul lesbians, as you might call us. But the I feel so grateful to the trans community for opening up gender for women in general. I think it's also a benefit to men, but I don't know if men need it quite as much as women do as the subordinate sex with less bodily autonomy in this country. And God knows the next few years might be horrendous, but I have hope long term. I have great hope long term for um, our collective ability to for self-determination, for being who we want to be, who we are, and controlling the aesthetics of our body, because it's so important to our psychology. And that's kind of a question I have for you, actually, because I wish I'd met you before I wrote the book, because you would be a perfect interviewee. And so, tell me, what are the most, yeah,
just, I'm just saying, stop it. You're
stop
just
it.
saying the
Okay.
perfect interview. I
So,
just
but, so what are the most, like, what are the greatest psychological shifts you see that you observe in your patients after their just affirming chest surgeries? You know, like, what are the most common emotions, the greatest revelations?
yeah. And that is and I appreciate you asking that question. And every, and you had mentioned this in your book as well. But what we have to understand is that it is certainly a journey, and the journey is going to be different for every single patient, right? I think for some patients, having a chest operation is, one piece in the overall journey. For most patients, is obviously a very, very important piece. And then just the sense of the sense of completeness, the sense of just being able to go out in the world and be yourself, right? Because that's the thing, like the patients don't they just don't want to be noticed for something that is not them. Who does, right? To be labeled, to be mistreated, to be abused because of a trait that you have no control over, right? That is just is absolutely ridiculous. But so if I think of like my young, top surgery patients, or young patients who have mastectomy, so the transformation, and for a lot of our young trans masculine, patients who seek top surgery, oftentimes is really the only procedure that they do get. But to see that transformation is amazing because before the operation, especially for young folks, imagine just having to go through puberty. Puberty is hard. It sucks. Adolescence is so painful. But to have to do it in the wrong body, oh my gosh, right? So these young folks are binding their chests, right? Developing rashes, musculoskeletal issues, lung or pulmonary issues, right? So it's debilitating. And that's just the physical parts, the visible physical parts, but think of like the internal psychological stuff and trauma that's going on. And so sometimes when I see the patients beforehand, very guarded, just, introverted, quiet, really not engaging with the world. And then after doing the operation, I see them a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years later. And I've been doing gender surgery now for about 11 years. So I've been seeing patients who have grown up. So I took care of them in high school, after high school, college, and then to hear from them and their parents saying, "Hey, I'm married now. I've got kids. I've got a job. I'm happy." And it's absolutely amazing to see that degree of transformation where, their chest or their appearance was keeping them from moving forward and having a productive life, right? But the attention that people get from patients, and it's interesting because I've talked with some patients who didn't expect the kind of attention that they were getting, right? And I've seen this with some. And once again, every patient is going to be different, and I don't want to generalize, but there have been some trans feminine patients who have had breast augmentation, and then all of a sudden the attention they get may be unwanted, right? And so they're getting attention from, not just men, but also from women, and they're getting treated differently because they have breasts. And they're like, gosh, I was not aware of that. I was expecting that. And they kind of lose control in terms of the type of attention, the type of interactions, that they want to have, with patients or with other folks in the community for better or, for worse. And I did have, one patient who actually requested her breast to be made smaller. She's like, it's getting too much attention, too much. And so it is, breasts can have a major impact on how you're treated. It really can.
And size is an issue.
Hmm.
Women with small breasts are treated differently from women with big natural breasts or big conspicuously augmented breasts. And there's a lot of judgment around those things. There's a lot of automatic assumptions. One of the studies I cite in my book, um, which is actually from the 90s, but certain attitudes like this still persist. And it found that it correlated certain adjectives with different sizes of chest. So the word small-breasted correlated with intelligent and lonely. And, and then the big breasts correlated with sexually available. Now, that can be a real problem for a young girl who develops early. And, there's a fair amount of trauma, even with cisgendered gals around their breasts, due to all sorts of predatory behavior. And I had my own small experience with it because I had to have a double mastectomy
Yeah.
for I was really lucky, actually. I had DCIS, which, a lot of stage 0 precancer, but they didn't know that at the time. And I opted for reconstruction because I have an attachment to my presentation as a woman. And interestingly, that is guaranteed by the federal government. One of, when we have a very specific form of gender affirming care, which is part of the legislation, the 1998 Women's Health Rights and Cancer Act. I mixed that up a bit, but something like that. So if you have insurance, your insurance is absolutely required to pay for your reconstruction if you've had a mastectomy or even a lumpectomy. And and so that's kind of astonishing to me. Here we live in a country where women have so few rights, but you've got the right to fake tits. And I'm like, wow, I mean, I have nothing. I'm the beneficiary of that. But, it is weird. You don't have the right not to have children. But, so anyhow, and I had my own a little bit of gender dysmorphia, sorry, body dysmorphia, as they call it, not to be confused with gender dysmorphia, because I came out with D cup boobs, despite the fact that I'd always been a small B cup and had made sure to really communicate to my plastic surgeon that I just wanted to be what I was. I just, I didn't have to change my wardrobe, didn't want to draw more attention to myself. I just wanted, you know, and so that and that was really, really uncomfortable for me. So I identify hugely from that small experience with what it must be like, and I interviewed a fair number of people who identified as transmasculine, transfeminine, and non-binary. And it was really interesting to me the very different choices they made around their
Hmm.
top halves. Because there's no like, you feel this way, therefore you will do that, right? I'm sure
Yes.
you know better than me. Is there, do you, I mean, I would love if you shared, some of the cases, obviously anonymously, some of the stories that your patients have around, here are two people who maybe describe their gender in very similar ways, but they opt for two slightly different solutions to their chest care.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good point. And I think that every operation is going to be individualized. And the thing is, like, for me, once again, as a cisgender, man I'm aware of my own biases, right? And when I started, working with the transgender and gender diverse community, I had to let go of the assumption that if someone is trans feminine, that she would want a breast augmentation or facial feminization or facial surgery or vaginoplasty, right? No, that's not the case. So gender identity, and I think everyone who's listening knows is like gender identity and gender expression are two different things, right? So when I am speaking with the patient, I always keep it to just body parts. I say, like, what are your embodiment goals,
Mm.
right? What are the goals for your chest? What are the goals for your face? What are your goals for your, yeah, for the genital region, right? But my team, but when the patient does reach out to our office, they're usually, yeah, there's specifics. And yeah, I want to talk with Dr. Satterwhite about like chest surgery. So I will only focus on that. So I'll say, hey, I see here that you're interested in chest surgery. What are your embodiment goals? I won't say, oh, by the way, what do you want to do with your face? And what do you want to do down below? No, right? Like a used cars, right?
Oh,
That's the word. And for
so
me,
relieved to hear that.
and the other thing is, and I've learned, and once again, we're very busy practice, and we don't want patients to, we want patients to embrace themselves, right? And
Mhm.
really only focus on what's bringing on their own dysphoria. And I have had patients who've said, yeah, I'm uncertain about whether or not to do this or this. And I'm like, and then I say, don't do it. Do not do it, right? Let's just focus on what you have dysphoria over, right? And everyone, and trying to like, everyone is an individual and they're going to have for their, like, because of their own upbringing and experiences they've had, they're going to have dysphoria over different things. Let's focus on that. We'll achieve your embodiment goals, see how you feel, and then we can consider doing, other procedures if that's needed. And I did have one patient who did move forward with a chest feminization, so identified as trans feminine, had breast augmentation, gorgeous. They look great. I shouldn't even, well, for me, I mean, they looked great, and I'm being objective as a gay man, but anyway, I mean, I guess we can all be objective. I don't know why I have to like say that, but anyway, they were just great, symmetrical. They had that nice, the top just had a nice slope, and then the nice, pendulous appearance. So they looked quote unquote natural. And I know you
Yeah,
talked about that. Everyone has a different view of what natural is.
yeah.
They were website worthy breasts, and she was like, Dr. Satterwhite, I mean,
Website
these
worthy breasts. I love that
but
expression.
she,
Oh,
she said, I love these, but they would look better on someone else. They're not for me, right? And so we removed them, right? And I wasn't gonna argue with her and say, no, it's a waste, and how dare you? You're gonna deprive the world of these beautiful, right? No, I mean, it's just like, okay. And then we had a couple more discussions, and she was persistent. I talked with her mental health professional as well, and just wanted to make sure that she was doing okay. And like, yeah, this is the right thing to do. And she was just like, it's not me. Right. And so remove them. And she was like, yeah, I feel better now. Right. So it's just everyone is going to have a journey. And sometimes, and that's that whole idea of when we're talking, and this wasn't detransitioning, right? And it wasn't even
yeah,
regret. She was like, at the time, it was the right
yeah.
decision for me. But then a year later, I realized no, and I should have the right to make that decision, right? Not every operation, right? We do as much evaluation and working with our patients as we can, but we have to accept the fact that there are going to be patients who do change their mind. They're
Yeah.
humans, right? And that goes into that whole discussion of detransition and regret that people try to use as a reason to not do gender surgery. Oh,
Well, I mean, how many cisgendered women have had, you know, implants and then decided they're too big or too small and up to size or down to size? One of my interviewees had had 7 cosmetic elective surgeries on her chest.
yeah.
You know, up fashion, down divorce, well, like up and down and all around based on her moment and life experience. I mean, she's now in her 70s. So, and this had started in her 20s, but, you know, is anyone questioning her gender based on that? you know?
No. And
Um,
why do you think
uh,
that's the case?
why? Well, because we live in this very binary system, unfortunately. It's getting less binary, but and it's less binary in other parts of the world. Um, but there is just like there's a huge divide in America, I guess, between, let's say, places like San Francisco, where there's a lot of fluidity, and the LGBTQ movement has always been strong, and there's been a lot of creativity in music, and the feminism as being strong, and other parts of America, conspicuously, I don't know, Dallas, where it's or more actually rural places where there's fear of people who are different. And you might have a better answer than that
No,
for me. I don't think I did
no,
very well
I
with that
don't. And I
answer.
think because you brought up this interesting point, and I appreciate just like in your book, your openness and honesty and just talking about your own relationship with, your breasts and then, having, reconstruction after having the mastectomy and just how people are so forthright. I don't know if forthright, but just like entitled to talk with you or I suppose anyone who has like breasts and to tell you what you should do with them. I find strange, like it's like I don't know, but the point that you brought up was like in terms of like breast reconstruction being covered by insurance. And this is a type of gender affirming care, but for transgender patients, that's not the case. And I'm wondering, is it because it's we live in such an endo-cis heteronormative world where there are straight men who are making decisions, and they're like, it would be horrific for them to see a female chest without breast on it, or to have it's just visually difficult for them to deal with. So you must have reconstruction. I don't know. Like, what is it that I've
I
tried to
think,
figure that out.
I mean, it certainly in my research. So there are four, they're all actually four cisgendered plastic surgeon women,
Mhm.
all women in the that chapter 3, Treasured
Mhm.
Chests. And they all have different specialties, and actually they have, there's one's Chinese, one's African American, one's blonde and white in Austin, Texas, and then another's Brazilian. And then they all do different kinds of feminizations or masculinizations, as well as part of their general practice. They're not specialists, but in the course of their work. And one of the things that really came through is it does seem certainly older straight men feel like they know better than women, and that they would often have patients, these women plastic surgeons would have women come to them because the plastic surgeon who'd done the original job refused to fix something, refused to take the volume down, refused to change their work because they had an aesthetic that they thought was the right one. And I think there's, many enlightened younger men, but and certainly gay men who get it. And I think that, you know, just a deep acceptance that different people have different relationships to their body is really important, and not something that, an older heterosexual white man has really been. I mean, white men are still the center of the universe in a kind of Vitruvian way. I think of that, Leonardo da Vinci drawing from the Renaissance, where man is at the center of the world. Well, it's a very particular kind of man. And I do believe he's got a beard, but, like a gray beard. Or I might be imagining that. But
I don't-
yeah,
yeah.
so it is. Um, I think it's, the surgeons in my book anyway. And I did try to interview some specialists who really were focused on gender affirming care. But when I was researching the book, it was a very sensitive moment. And I almost got into one practice where there were three surgeons. Um, uh, and and then they backed out, and I think they were just anxious. I think it's
Yeah.
easier now the book's out for people to see that, whose side I'm on and where my curiosity leads me. But at that time, it was like, oh dear, She used
Yeah.
to write for The Economist. What you gonna say? You know, something like that. You know,
Yeah.
and I appreciate that. It's yeah.
Yeah.
So,
I
but
did
I
think-
do wish we'd met earlier.
Yeah,
And
but that doesn't, but
I'll
we,
have to write about you someday.
no, but we've met now and that's for a reason. And I appreciate once again your time. We've come to the hour now. It's at 6 p.m. But I really appreciate your time. I could speak with you forever, and I think the audience would love to hear so much of what you're saying. I appreciate all that you're doing for the community, for the country, for the world. I love this book. I want to read your other books as well. And so certainly for those who are listening, you can check our website, alliancesurgical.com, for additional information. I encourage everyone to read Tits Up. You can find it on sarahthornton.com, Barnes& and Noble, books.org. Truly riveting. Um, I appreciate your time once again, Sarah. And as I said, I could speak with you forever. This has been a wonderful conversation. Oh,
Thank you hugely, Dr. Satterwhite, although I know you told me
you.
to call you Thomas. And I look forward to seeing you.
Oh, we got. Okay.
Just called me. But anyway,
Okay.
thank you and goodbye.
Goodbye. Bye. Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you.